The desperate plea. On a distant planet, far from the reach of Earth, a peaceful alien race known as the Zetheri found themselves facing a terrible crisis. For centuries, they had lived in harmony with nature, and their advanced technology had allowed them to thrive in the vastness of space. But now, all of that was about to be destroyed. The Zetheri were a peaceful people, focused on knowledge, exploration, and peaceful trade. They had never known war, and their greatest weapon was their wisdom. But the sudden arrival of the Serac Empire changed everything. The Serac were ruthless conquerors, intent on spreading their rule across the galaxy. They attacked without warning, using powerful, devastating weapons to lay waste to entire worlds. The Zetheri had been helpless in the face of such power. They had fought back with everything they had, but it was no use. The Serac Empire's forces were too strong, their weapons too advanced. One by one, the Zetheri cities fell, their once beautiful landscapes ravaged by fire and destruction. The Zetheri had no way of fighting back. In their desperation, the leaders of the Zetheri made a decision. They would send a message, one final plea for help. They knew the risk. They didn't know if anyone would even hear it, let alone respond, but it was their only hope. On the night of the attack, as the sky above the capital city rained fire from the enemy's ships, the Zetheri leaders gathered in their hidden council chambers. The atmosphere was thick with fear and uncertainty. The air was heavy with the weight of their decision. The planet's greatest minds worked quickly, tapping into the ancient technology that had once been used for peaceful communication with distant worlds. It was an ancient system, capable of sending messages across galaxies, but it had not been used in centuries. As the leaders watched, the message began to form. It would be simple, a plea for help, a desperate cry for salvation. They had no idea who would receive it or if they would even understand it, but it was their only chance. The words were chosen carefully, each one carrying the weight of a planet's survival. The message read, "To any who can hear this, we are the Zetheri. Our world is being destroyed by the Serac Empire. We have no weapons, no hope. Our people are dying, and our cities are falling. We beg you, help us. We do not know if you will receive this, but if you can hear our plea, please answer us. We need your salvation." As the message transmitted into the vast reaches of space, the Zetheri leaders held their breath. The process was slow, taking hours to send the message across the stars. They could only hope it reached someone, anyone, who could help. The council room was eerily silent as the transmission was completed. Outside, the once peaceful world was under attack. The sky was filled with the thunder of explosions, the flash of energy beams, and the distant screams of the Zetheri people as they fled to underground shelters. There was no time left. The leaders knew that if they waited much longer, their civilization would be gone. But all they could do now was wait. Hours passed, and the situation grew worse. The Serac Empire's ships had landed on the surface, sending waves of destruction through the remaining cities. The Zetheri had done everything they could to prepare their people, but the Serac were too powerful, and the planet's defenses had long since been overwhelmed. Despair began to settle over the council. The hope that the message would be answered was fading, and yet they held on to one last thread of hope. Perhaps somewhere out there, someone had heard their cry for help. But deep down, they knew the truth. This might be the end. Just as the council members began to give up hope, a strange thing happened. A flicker of light appeared on the council's communication device. It was faint at first, like a weak signal struggling to break through the vast emptiness of space. The leaders leaned forward, their eyes wide with disbelief. The signal grew stronger. Could it be? The device began to hum, and a voice, human, unmistakably human, came through the static. "We received your message." The leaders of the Zetheri gasped, their hearts racing. Someone had heard their plea. Someone had answered. The voice continued, steady and calm, yet filled with authority. "We are humanity. From the planet Earth. We've received your distress signal, and we are on our way. The council members looked at each other in shock. It was real. Earth was coming to help them. As the voice continued to speak, the Zetheri realized that this was no simple act of kindness. Earth had sent its fleet to answer the call. Humanity was coming to save them. But how could they be so sure that Earth would be able to defeat the mighty Serac Empire? "We don't know how long it will take to reach you," the voice said, "but we will do everything in our power to help. Stay strong, Zetheri. Help is on the way." The council members exchanged looks of relief and disbelief. They had no idea what humanity was capable of, but they clung to the belief that salvation had arrived. The Zetheri had answered the call for help, and now humanity was coming to answer theirs. The unknown response. The Zetheri's council waited in anxious silence, the weight of their desperate plea hanging heavy in the air. The communication device hummed softly in the corner of the room, its flickering light the only source of illumination in the darkened chamber. The hope of salvation, once a distant dream, now felt like a tangible reality. Humanity was coming to their aid. But what did they truly know about Earth? Could this human race, unknown to them until now, really be capable of saving their planet from the Serac Empire? The voice from Earth had been calm, assuring them that help was on the way. But the Zetheri leaders couldn't help but wonder, how would humanity respond to such a monumental challenge? The Serac were no ordinary invaders. They had decimated entire worlds, and their ruthless tactics were legendary. What could a species like humanity, still in its early stages of space exploration, possibly offer? But there was no time for doubt. The Council's decision had been made. The transmission had been sent. The only thing left was to wait. Back on Earth, in a high-security underground facility hidden deep beneath the planet's surface, Dr. Elena Sokolov stared at the flickering screen in front of her. She had spent years studying alien languages and technologies, but never had she encountered anything quite like the message from the Zetheri. At first, she had thought it was a joke, some sort of elaborate hoax. But as the message had decoded, her heart had raced with disbelief. It was real, it was desperate, and it was a cry for help. Dr. Sokolov had immediately reported the transmission to the government, but her findings were met with skepticism. The higher-ups dismissed it as a glitch in the communication system, a technical error that had nothing to do with reality. They were too focused on their own plans to pay any attention to a message from an unknown alien race. They had their own problems to deal with. Earth had its own crisis, after all. But Dr. Sokolov refused to let it go. Something about the message had struck her deeply, a sense of urgency she couldn't ignore. She had secretly begun working on decrypting the rest of the transmission, hoping to find more answers. What she uncovered shocked her to the core. The Zetheri were facing annihilation, their planet under attack by the Serac Empire. And they needed help. As she dug deeper, Dr. Sokolov realized that this wasn't just an isolated plea. The Serac were a threat to all life in the galaxy, and if they succeeded in conquering the Zetheri, there would be nothing stopping them from coming to Earth next. Humanity had been unaware of this new enemy, but now they were forced to confront it. Earth had to act. With the approval of a select group of high-ranking officials, Dr. Sokolov was given permission to take action. A fleet of human ships was already being prepared, though it was far from ready. But the transmission was clear. Earth had to help, and time was running out. The Zetheri, on the other hand, had no way of knowing what was happening on Earth. They could only wait and hope. The days dragged on, the sounds of the Serac's devastating weapons echoing in the background. The once beautiful world was now scared, its cities reduced to rubble. The Zetheri's greatest minds had been working tirelessly to defend their planet, but their efforts were futile. They had no more resources, no more time. The Serac had arrived, and the planet's last defense was crumbling. They had sent their message, but there was still no sign of help. In the darkened council room, the Zetheri leaders gathered once more. They couldn't wait any longer. If no help arrived soon, the Serac would take the planet, and their people would be enslaved or worse. Their only hope rested on humanity, the species that had heard their call. But with no sign of a response, their desperation grew. It wasn't until the Zetheri began to prepare for the worst that they received a flicker of light, a faint signal, barely perceptible, reaching across the stars. The transmission wasn't from Earth directly, but rather from the fleet that had been sent to their aid. It was a small message, one simple line: "We're coming." At first, the Zetheri couldn't believe it. The message had no words of comfort, no grand promises. It was just that one line, and yet it was enough. It confirmed that humanity had heard their plea, and they were sending help. But how long would it take for the human fleet to arrive? The Serac forces were closing in, and the planet's defenses were all but gone. Time was running out. The Zetheri couldn't afford to wait any longer. Their only hope was that humanity's ships would be able to reach them before it was too late. The voices of the Council grew more frantic as the situation worsened. How could they defend themselves against such an overwhelming enemy? They had no answers, only questions. And as the stars outside their planet darkened, they could only pray that the message from humanity was real, that Earth's fleet was truly on its way. In the depths of space, humanity's fleet began its journey, an uncertain, dangerous mission to rescue a planet on the brink of destruction. The Zetheri had answered their call for help, and now it was time for Earth to answer theirs. The arrival. The stars shimmered like diamonds against the black velvet of space. The Zetheri's world, once vibrant and full of life, was now under the shadow of the Serac Empire. The invaders had crushed their defenses and were marching towards the last remaining strongholds. Desperation filled the hearts of the Zetheri leaders as they watched their people suffer. In the distance, the faintest glimmer of hope arrived, like a tiny beacon in the vast darkness. The message from humanity had been clear: "We're coming." But how could they be sure? How could they place their faith in a species they knew so little about? The Council stood by their communication device, anxiously awaiting any further word. Minutes felt like hours. Outside, the Serac forces grew closer to their final objective. Their massive warships loomed overhead, casting dark shadows across the once peaceful cities below. The air was thick with smoke and dust from the constant bombardment. The Zetheri people had retreated to underground bunkers, praying that the human fleet would arrive in time. Then the signal came again. The device buzzed to life. This time, there was no uncertainty, no static. The voice from Earth spoke once more, calm and determined. "We are entering your system now. Prepare for our arrival." The Zetheri leaders exchanged startled glances. Earth had done it. They had sent a fleet, and it was almost here. Far from the Council chambers, deep in space, the human fleet was navigating its way towards the Zetheri homeworld. The fleet was smaller than anything the Serac Empire could muster, but humanity had something the Serac didn't: a will to fight, an unshakable resolve. The fleet was led by Admiral Michael Thompson, a veteran of numerous military campaigns, who had been chosen to lead this desperate mission. Admiral Thompson stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eagle's Pride. The large, gleaming ship was a marvel of human engineering, equipped with the latest technology Earth had to offer. It wasn't as advanced as the Serac's ships, but it was far more versatile. Humanity had spent years preparing for the day they would need to defend themselves from extraterrestrial threats, and the time had come. "Admiral, we're approaching the Zetheri system," a voice called out from the communications panel. Thompson nodded, his face set in grim determination. "Maintain speed. No turning back now. We need to get there before the Serac wipe them out." As the fleet moved closer, they saw the first signs of battle, explosions lighting up the dark sky as the Serac ships pounded the surface of the planet. The Zetheri's defenses had failed, but humanity's fleet was not going to back down. The human ships spread out, each one a symbol of Earth's resolve to protect those in need. Their weapon systems powered up, and for the first time in a long while, there was a feeling of unity on the bridge of the Eagle's Pride. They were about to face an enemy that had never been defeated, but Earth's warriors were prepared to fight. Back on the Zetheri homeworld, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The people watched from the safety of their underground shelters as their sky was darkened by the shadows of the Serac warships. And then, as if answering their prayers, something changed. From the horizon came a flash of light. A streak of brightness, fast and determined, cut through the air, signaling the arrival of humanity's fleet. It was a moment the Zetheri would never forget, the first real hope they had felt in weeks. The fleet didn't hesitate. Immediately, they began targeting the Serac ships. Despite the overwhelming firepower of the enemy, humanity's ships were fast and agile, weaving in and out of the incoming blasts and launching precise strikes against the Serac's heavy armor. The battle was fierce, the sound of energy blasts and explosions echoing through space. The Serac forces retaliated, but they were unprepared for the fierce resistance put up by the human fleet. The Eagle's Pride led the charge, its weapon systems blasting away at the enemy ships, creating openings for the other human ships to strike. The Zetheri leaders watched in awe as the battle unfolded before them. They had never seen such determination. They had never seen beings so willing to risk everything to protect others. The human fleet had arrived, and they weren't going to let the Serac take another world. As the battle raged on, the Zetheri had their first taste of hope in weeks. The Serac ships, which had been invincible just days before, were now retreating. Slowly, the human fleet began to push them back. The Serac were not used to such resistance, and they faltered. Admiral Thompson's voice came through the Zetheri communications device, steady and strong. "Zetheri leaders, we are taking control of your skies. Hold your ground. We'll push the Serac back to their hellish home." The Zetheri leaders felt tears of relief fill their eyes. The humans had done it. They had arrived just in time. And now, their enemies were on the run. But the battle was not over. The Serac had many more ships, and the human fleet was not invincible. The war was far from won. But for the first time, the Zetheri saw the possibility of victory. They saw that, together with humanity, they could stand against the empire that had tried to destroy them. As the human fleet continued to fight, the Zetheri leaders began preparing for the next phase of their plan. If they could survive this battle, they would join humanity in the fight to free the galaxy from the Serac Empire's tyranny. Together, they would become a force strong enough to turn the tide. The Serac retaliation. The skies over the Zetheri homeworld were alive with the sounds of battle. The human fleet had arrived just in time, pushing back the Serac warships with surprising speed. For the first time in weeks, the Zetheri people allowed themselves to believe in the possibility of victory. But the Serac Empire was not one to accept defeat easily. As Admiral Thompson observed the battle unfold on the bridge of the Eagle's Pride, his face was a mixture of determination and concern. The Serac had begun retreating, but he knew they weren't giving up. They would regroup, plan, and return stronger than ever. "Keep the pressure on them," Thompson ordered, his voice calm but resolute. "We can't let them regroup. Push them back while we still have the upper hand." The human fleet continued to press the attack, their ships darting through space like swarming insects, using their agility and speed to their advantage. Serac warships, massive and imposing, struggled to keep up, their cumbersome movements leaving them vulnerable to human strikes. Explosions lit up the void as human ships unleashed salvo after salvo of deadly fire. But then, the first wave of reinforcements arrived. A massive fleet of Serac ships, far larger than any the humans had faced, appeared from the depths of space. They were positioned strategically, surrounding the human fleet on all sides. The Serac had realized they were losing ground and had come back in full force, determined to crush the threat once and for all. Admiral Thompson's eyes widened as he saw the sheer number of enemy ships now in orbit. The Serac had clearly underestimated humanity's resolve, but now they were retaliating with everything they had. His fleet was vastly outnumbered, and though they had the advantage of speed and strategy, this new wave of reinforcements posed a deadly threat. "Prepare for the worst," Thompson said, his voice a calm command that hid the urgency behind it. "We hold our ground, no matter the cost." The human fleet tightened their formation, focusing all firepower on the nearest enemy ships. The battle raged on, but it quickly became apparent that the Serac had learned from their earlier missteps. They were not going to make the same mistake twice. The human ships began to take heavy damage as the Serac's massive energy cannons tore through their shields. "Admiral," a voice shouted from the communications panel, "we're losing ships. The Serac are targeting our most vulnerable vessels. They're adapting to our tactics." "Don't pull back," Thompson replied, his jaw clenched. "We can't give them an inch." Back on the Zethari planet, the people watched in horror as the space battle intensified. The explosions in the sky grew brighter, the once clear stars obscured by the shadow of the Serac fleet. But even as the battle seemed to turn against the humans, the Zethari were not without their own resources. The Zethari military had long kept a hidden fleet of advanced ships, prepared for just such a scenario. They weren't as advanced as the Serac or the human ships, but they could still make a difference. Zethari Commander Terrace sat in the control room of one of the Zethari battlecruisers, watching the destruction unfold on the monitors. His hands gripped the arms of his chair, and his heart raced. The Serac were relentless, but he knew they couldn't hold the line alone. He had to act now. "Prepare the fleet," Terrace ordered. "We're joining the fight." Within moments, the hidden Zethari ships emerged from their underground bases, breaking through the atmosphere and into space. Their appearance was like a burst of light in the chaos, a glimmer of hope for the Zethari people. Their ships were sleek, designed for speed and maneuverability, and they immediately began striking the Serac ships with precision. The Serac fleet, taken by surprise, faltered for a brief moment. The combined forces of humanity and the Zethari were beginning to push back the invaders, but they were still vastly outnumbered. The Serac were nothing if not relentless, and their warships were equipped with devastating weapons. Each blow from the Serac sent shockwaves through the battlefield. And yet, humanity and the Zethari pressed forward, unwilling to surrender. "Commander Terrace, we can't hold them off forever," one of the Zethari officers cried out. "We need more reinforcements." Terrace's face hardened with resolve. "We don't have time for reinforcements. We fight with what we have." On the Eagle's Pride, Admiral Thompson watched as the Zethari joined the fray. Their ships were doing their best to disrupt the Serac forces, but the enemy was relentless. For every Serac ship destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. Thompson could feel the pressure mounting, the weight of this battle bearing down on him. They were losing ships, and if this continued, the Serac would break through their lines. "We're running out of time," Thompson muttered under his breath. "We need to end this now." The Serac were adapting. They had begun to understand humanity's tactics, and their counters were brutal. A large portion of the human fleet was now engaging in a full retreat, but not before one final, desperate strike. Thompson's strategy was simple. If they couldn't win, they would at least inflict enough damage to cripple the Serac forces, leaving them unable to continue their invasion. "Launch all remaining fighters," Thompson barked. "Give them everything we've got." The remaining human fighters surged forward, weaving through the Serac warships like arrows in flight, their small, agile forms almost impossible to target. The Serac fired relentlessly, but their blasts often missed. In a final surge of aggression, the human fighters tore through the Serac lines, taking down massive warships one after another. But just as victory seemed within their reach, the Serac unleashed their deadliest weapon. A massive energy beam, far larger than anything the humans had faced before, ripped through space, heading straight for the human flagship. The Eagle's Pride shuddered violently as it took the full brunt of the attack. Admiral Thompson's voice came through the communications panel, his voice strained but steady. "This is it, people. We fight to the end." The moment of truth had arrived. The Serac were not going to retreat. They were going to finish what they had started. And humanity, along with the Zetheri, would have to fight with every ounce of strength they had left. The last stand. The Eagle's pride shook violently as the Syrinx's massive energy beam struck it. The flagship groaned under the immense pressure, and sparks flew from the control panels. On the bridge, Admiral Thompson gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles turning white. His officers scrambled, trying to regain control of the ship. It felt like the universe was holding its breath. "Damage report," Thompson barked. "Shields are down to 20%, sir," one of his officers shouted. "The hull is buckling in multiple areas. We can't withstand another hit like that." The situation was dire. With the flagship on the verge of destruction, the human fleet was beginning to falter. Ships that had once been the pride of Earth's military were now scattered, their formations in disarray. The Serac were relentless, pressing their advantage without mercy. But Admiral Thompson was not one to give up easily. He turned to his second-in-command, Captain Laura Kim. "Launch everything we've got. All remaining fighters. Do whatever it takes to keep the Serac occupied." Kim nodded, her face grim but resolute. "Aye, sir." The last remaining squadrons of human fighters, half of them already battered, began their final assault. They dove toward the Serac fleet, firing everything they had left. Missiles streaked through the stars, and the sound of gunfire echoed through the dark void. In the chaos, the fighters swarmed the enemy ships, hitting vulnerable points, causing explosions, and distracting the massive warships from the humans' fragile defense. Meanwhile, on the Zetheri side of the battle, Commander Terrace watched the unfolding chaos with a sense of helplessness. His fleet had sustained heavy losses. Zetheri ships were designed for agility, not durability, and the Serac's superior firepower had taken a toll. Even their swift attacks could not outmaneuver the overwhelming might of the enemy. But Terrace would not let his people die in vain. "Initiate the final phase of the plan," Terrace ordered. His voice was cold, almost detached, as he gave the command that would seal the fate of the battle. On the surface of the Zetheri homeworld, deep underground, a massive portal began to hum to life. Hidden beneath layers of rock and earth, the Zetheri had been building something, a secret weapon that could turn the tide of the battle. The portal's shimmering lights cast eerie shadows as the energy built up, preparing to unleash something unlike anything seen before. Back in the heart of the battle, Admiral Thompson had a feeling. It was as if something was changing in the air, something different, something bigger than just a simple clash of ships. He turned to Captain Kim. "Do you feel that?" he asked, his voice tense. Before Kim could respond, a sudden explosion of light pierced the darkness of space. It wasn't a normal explosion. This was something far more powerful. A massive beam of energy shot into the sky, blasting through the void, connecting the Zetheri homeworld to the battlefield itself. "What is that?" Kim asked, stunned. "I don't know," Thompson replied, his voice trailing off as he realized what was happening. The Zetheri had just unleashed something far beyond the human fleet's capabilities. The sheer energy pouring from the portal was unlike anything he had ever seen. For a brief moment, it felt like the very fabric of space had been torn apart. The ground shook beneath them, and every sensor on the bridge lit up, trying to process the energy levels. But there was no time for awe. The Serac had noticed too. One of the largest Serac ships, the Vrothar, the flagship of their invasion force, locked its weapons onto the energy source. Its massive cannons hummed to life, preparing to fire at the Zetheri homeworld. If they destroyed the source of the energy, the Zetheri would lose their advantage, and the humans would be left to fight alone once more. "Target the Vrothar," Admiral Thompson shouted, his voice sharp with authority. "Take that ship down before they can fire." The remaining human ships, with their last reserves of energy, turned their guns on the massive Serac vessel. The Vrothar was heavily armored, its weapons capable of obliterating entire fleets, but it was not invincible. Human fighters darted through space, trying to avoid enemy fire while taking every shot they could. They hit the Vrothar's weak points, its engines, its communication arrays, and most importantly, its weapons systems. For a brief moment, the battle seemed to slow, as if time had frozen. Then, with a deafening roar, the Vrothar exploded into a burst of light. The Serac flagship's destruction sent a shockwave through the battlefield, and for the first time in hours, the human forces and the Zethari forces felt the rush of hope. The momentum had shifted, but it was not over. From the wreckage of the Vrothar, several smaller Serac ships scattered, regrouping into a last-ditch formation. The Serac were still dangerous, still relentless. The human fleet's victory was not certain. At that moment, Commander Terra's voice crackled over the comms. "Admiral, we've activated the final phase. We're sending everything we have left. Prepare for the final assault." Admiral Thompson nodded grimly. "We've got one shot at this. Let's make it count." With everything on the line, the Zethari and human fleets pressed forward. The full force of their remaining fighters surged through the battlefield, coordinating with pinpoint precision to strike at the heart of the Serac forces. It was the last stand, and every ship, every fighter, and every soldier knew it. The final battle had begun. The tide turns. The chaos of the battlefield intensified. The black void of space was alive with the furious exchange of fire. The combined human and Zethari fleets pressed forward, relentless in their pursuit of victory. But even with the Vrothar destroyed, the Serac were not defeated. Their ships moved with an eerie precision, their strength undiminished, as though they were waiting for the right moment to strike back with overwhelming force. Admiral Thompson stood at the center of the bridge, sweat beading on his forehead. His eyes scanned the holographic map of the battlefield, now a chaotic tangle of red and blue blips. "Admiral, we have incoming," Lieutenant Johnson shouted. Thompson's heart skipped a beat. He had felt it. The tension in the air. The Serac were not going down without a final, desperate push. "Hold position. Bring the fighters back into formation," Thompson ordered. But it was too late. The Serac had already made their move. Without warning, a massive Serac warship emerged from the shadows of the battlefield, its dark, jagged silhouette cutting through the darkness like a predator stalking its prey. It was unlike any ship the humans had encountered before, a monster of pure destruction. The obsidian scythe, the final weapon of the Serac Empire, had arrived. The obsidian scythe was a terrifying sight. It was a behemoth of a ship, nearly 5 times the size of the Vrothar, with weapons capable of wiping out entire fleets in a single shot. Its black hull gleamed with a malevolent energy, and its weapons were powered by a terrifying core that pulsed with unnatural light. It was clear that the Serac had saved their ultimate weapon for this moment. This was no ordinary battle. This was their final stand. "Brace for impact," Thompson shouted as the Serac flagship charged forward, opening fire with its massive plasma cannons. The first volley tore through the human fleet, disintegrating ships in the blink of an eye. The energy beams were so powerful that they sliced through hulls like paper, leaving only wreckage in their wake. The human fleet staggered, struggling to maintain its formation, but the obsidian scythe was relentless. It was a force of nature, and nothing seemed capable of stopping it. But Admiral Thompson refused to give up. He gritted his teeth and looked at Captain Kim, who stood by his side, her expression one of determination. "Captain, are the Zethari ready?" he asked. Kim nodded. "They're prepared, Admiral. We're going to need every ship in the fight to take down that monster." With a quick flick of his hand, Thompson activated the comm system. "All units, this is Admiral Thompson. We are not retreating. We are not backing down. This is the fight for our survival. All ships, form up. We attack together or we die together. Let's show the Serac what humanity is made of." The message spread like wildfire across the fleet. The human forces, battered and broken, began to rally. Even the Zethari, who had seen their own forces decimated, joined in the charge. The final push had begun. On the Eagle's Pride, the massive human flagship, the crew was preparing for the battle of their lives. Thompson watched as the bridge crew worked together with precision, coordinating with the Zethary ships. Every fighter, every ship, every weapon was now focused on the obsidian scythe. The obsidian scythe fired again, its plasma beams arcing through space. But this time, the human and Zethary fleets were ready. A massive explosion rocked the Serac ship as several human fighters, their last remaining missiles, found their mark. The Serac flagship shuddered under the attack, but it didn't fall. Not yet. Target its core, Thompson yelled. All ships, fire at its core. The Zethary ships, agile and precise, moved in closer, their weapons aimed at the obsidian scythe's core. The human ships, despite their damage, followed suit. The battle was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a race against time. The Serac flagship was dangerous, but its core was its weak point. If they could destroy it, they would win. Fighters darted through the hail of energy fire, narrowly avoiding the Serac's devastating blasts. It was a dance of death. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light, but the humans and Zethary pushed forward, undeterred. Admiral Thompson watched the final assault unfold with a mixture of awe and fear. This was their last chance, and it was all coming down to this. Now, Thompson screamed, as the final wave of missiles from the combined human and Zethary fleets launched toward the obsidian scythe. The explosion was catastrophic. The obsidian scythe erupted in a massive burst of energy, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. The Serac flagship was no more, its core torn apart by the concentrated firepower of the human and Zethary forces. The once unstoppable warship was now a smoldering wreck, its remains drifting through space like a lifeless husk. But the battle was far from over. The Serac were not completely defeated. Their remaining fleet was still formidable, and the human and Zethary forces were battered, exhausted, and running low on resources. Admiral Thompson stood, watching the remnants of the obsidian scythe burn in space. This was a hard-won victory, but the final chapter had not yet been written. "The war is not over," Thompson said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "But we've shown them that humanity will fight, and we will never surrender." The battle for the galaxy was not over, but humanity had just taken a step toward victory. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and there was no turning back. The final victory. The obsidian scythe was no more. Its massive form, once the symbol of the Serac Empire's dominance, now floated as a charred husk in the dark void of space. The explosion had been devastating, sending shockwaves across the battlefield and scattering Serac warships like leaves in a storm. For a moment, there was silence, a brief and fragile breath in the chaos of war. Admiral Thompson stood at the center of the bridge, his eyes fixed on the debris field where the obsidian scythe had once been. The victory was sweet, but it was not enough. The Serac fleet, though rattled, was far from broken. Their remaining ships were regrouping, preparing for one last push. The odds were still stacked against the human and Zethary forces. "Status report," Thompson commanded, his voice steady but tired. "Sir, the Serac are retreating." "But not entirely," Lieutenant Johnson responded. "They're reorganizing, but their numbers are dwindling. We might still have a chance." "Not good enough," Thompson muttered. He knew this was the critical moment. If they didn't finish the Serac off now, their enemy would regroup and renew the war. The humans had to strike while the iron was hot. "We need to hit them hard and fast," Captain Kim said, her voice firm. "If we delay, we risk losing everything we'd fought for." Thompson nodded. "Prepare the fleet for the final assault. We need to wipe out the Serac once and for all. No more chances." Across the fleet, the remaining human and Zethary ships were gathering. The damage was clear. Nearly half of the human fleet had been destroyed, and the Zethary had suffered heavy losses as well. But there was no retreating now. The last remnants of the Serac forces were regrouping, their ships forming a defensive perimeter around the remaining fleet. It was now or never. The human and Zethary ships, battered but determined, charged forward, their weapons firing in unison. The remaining Sarek ships opened fire, their energy blasts streaking through the blackness of space. The final battle had begun. Admiral Thompson's heart raced as he watched the chaos unfold on the holomap. The remaining Sarek ships were powerful, but they were disorganized. The destruction of the Obsidian Scythe had shattered their leadership. The human and Zetheri forces pressed on, their firepower relentless. But then, a new threat emerged. From behind the remaining Sarek fleet, a large ship, darker and more menacing than the others, slowly emerged from the shadows. Its hull was covered in jagged black armor, and its weapons hummed with an ominous energy. "This is their last weapon," Captain Kim said, her voice grave. "We've seen nothing like it before." Thompson's eyes narrowed. "We take it down, or this fight ends here." The ship, the Sarek Emperor, was unlike any the human fleet had faced. Its weapons fired massive beams of concentrated energy that sent shockwaves through the human and Zetheri ships. Several smaller ships were obliterated in an instant, their wreckage lost to the void. The Sarek Emperor was a monster, and it was clear that it had been saved for this moment. The final weapon to decide the war. The humans and Zetheri forces had no choice but to rally together for one last assault. There was no retreating, no second chances. This was it. Admiral Thompson issued the command. "All ships, focus all fire on the Sarek Emperor. We end this now." The remaining human and Zetheri ships concentrated their firepower, unleashing everything they had left. Missiles, lasers, and energy beams streaked across the battlefield, pounding the Sarek Emperor with all the fury they could muster. The ship's shields flickered, struggling to absorb the assault, but it wasn't enough. Slowly, the massive ship began to crumble under the barrage. "This is it," Thompson muttered to himself, watching the final moments of the battle unfold. The Sarek Emperor fought back, but the human and Zetheri fleets had the upper hand. With one final, massive explosion, the Sarek Emperor was destroyed. The shockwave sent a ripple through the battlefield, and in its wake, the remaining Sarek forces scattered. Their once proud fleet was in disarray, and without their leader, they had no hope of regrouping. The human and Zetheri forces stood victorious. The battle was over. The Sarek Empire, for all its power, had been shattered. "Victory," Captain Kim said, her voice filled with disbelief. Admiral Thompson allowed himself a moment of relief, but it was fleeting. He knew that this victory came at a heavy cost. Too many lives had been lost. The human fleet had been decimated, and the Zetheri had suffered just as much. Yet they had won. The war was over. The Sarek Empire had been defeated. As the remaining ships drifted through the silent void, the gravity of what had just happened began to sink in. Humanity, alongside its Zetheri allies, had defeated one of the most powerful empires the galaxy had ever seen. They had fought against overwhelming odds, and they had won. "This is just the beginning," Thompson said, his voice full of resolve. "We've shown the galaxy that humanity is not to be underestimated, and we'll make sure the Sarek will never rise again." The fight was over, but the war had changed the fate of the galaxy forever. Humanity had proven that, even in the face of impossible odds, they could stand tall. Now it was time to rebuild, to heal the wounds of war, and to prepare for whatever challenges lay ahead. The galaxy had been saved, and humanity had earned its place in the stars.